Thank you for coming to Kuch Khaas. This is the third in a series on election 2013. Today we will be looking at a comparative framework of the 5 major political parties' manifestos. We have a wonderful panel with us today. There's been a lot of discussion on this is an election of the right. Certainly not looking at the panel that we have today. So we look forward to a progressive and a more wider lens of looking at the political messaging that is going on in 2013. On my extreme left is Babar Sattar. He needs very little introduction. He's a lawyer and a columnist. Next to him is Dr. Asim Sajjad Akhtar, who is a professor at Quaid-e-Azam University. And right next to me is Zahid Husain, again with very little introduction, an author and a columnist and an analyst. And on my right, representing my gender, will be providing a gender lens, a very discussed topic in election 2013. We'll start with Babar.
I have gone through the 300 pages of manifestos over the weekend because Nino instructed that every word should have been read. The questions that you posed to me, I'd want to deviate from them a little bit because, you know, when you looking at manifestos, we're looking at policy from a national perspective and not just from an Islamabad perspective. So I think that will be too narrow a way to look at these. What I want to do is speak about some broad points and then talk about individual manifestos a little bit. What was amazing to me reading all of this was the agreement across parties, across the political divide on the problems that we have and also on the solutions. And so in a certain way, everyone seems to agree on what the problems are, what the solutions should be. So you get a little confused that the only distinction then is who do you trust would actually implement some of the things that they're saying, and not much else. The other interesting thing for me was that almost all political parties used procedure as an alternative to substance. So on the issues where you would really want them to take a position, what they've said is it's going to be decided in accordance with the aspirations of people, which means absolutely nothing. And that's a striking point, especially when you look at, for example, the MQM and Karachi, or you look at the ANP and FATA, or you look at terrorism and all the 3 main parties. Those are the places where you would have expected them to take a position and say, okay, this is the problem and this is what the solution is going to be. And that is exactly where they've shied away from suggesting a solution. So one of the things that I thought was that there's on the key divides, there's either hypocrisy or there's silence, which is disappointing. So I just run through 4 issue areas. Governance. When you go through a manifesto and you know somebody's telling you education budget or expenditure is going to go up from 1.8% to 5%, health is going to go up from 1.8% to 5%, etc., etc. And you go through the entire budget, and I understand that there's another session on economy, but there was no clarity to me, at least, as to where this money is coming from. So it seems to be one of those things where everything is being promised, but by the end of it, you kind of understand that this will probably not get done. We've heard a lot of parties talk about terrorism. We've seen this justice sector movement as well, the lawyers movement, etc. A lot of people have talked about reform of the justice sector. Nothing in the manifestos, nothing that makes sense. You read the PTI manifesto, it says we are the Tehreek-e-Insaf, we are the Justice Party, this is very, very important to us. And then there's one off page saying absolutely nothing, how it's going to be reformed. Education, health, or citizen services. Again, a lot of promises there. But then you're reminded of the last education policy, a brilliant document which came out during the PPP's regime, and you read it and you were like, wow, now Pakistan is going to change. And then nothing happens. So a lot of promises in the health and education fields by all parties, including the PPP and the PMLN, and no suggestion as to why health being a provincial subject, no suggestion by Awami National Party as to why nothing has moved, or PMLN or MQM, because all of these parties are in power at one point or at one place or the other. The other crucial issue I thought, which didn't find any focus, is religion. Nobody has talked about the role of state in relation to religion, or the big question of whether we're going to be an Islamic state or we're going to be a Muslim country, and what's the distinction between the two. Nobody's addressed that. Not even the liberal parties that we come out and defend vociferously every time they're attacked, that this is liberal Pakistan are under attack. Even they've not even touched the issue. The third important divide, I think, is national security. Again, no sensible conversation on national security. Who will do things that are to be done? There's some broad suggestion in the PMLN manifesto about civilians being in control. But the key issues when we actually think of an anti-terror policy, what's the frontline agency in Pakistan? Is it going to be the army, people who criticize the army? Then are they going to empower the police? Is there going to be a new police force, a new paramilitary force that's going to take care? Are you going to treat FATA differently or KPK differently from what you're going to do in Balochistan? So once the policy is there, how is it going to be operationalized? There's one line in PTI's manifesto saying NACTA is going to be empowered. NACTA is a pretty toothless organization. It's been there for 5 years. It's not done anything. How is it going to get teeth? I'm sure Zahid is going to talk in more detail about that. So, but again, who are we fighting? Who's going to fight? Etc. etc. None of those critical points which are actually confusing the country. Whose war is it? None of those have been clearly addressed. Then again, economy and Professor Saab is probably going to address that better than I do. But like reading these, you don't get a sense as to whether any political party has a clear sense of the relationship between the state and economy. In a sense that everyone more or less is suggesting that subsidy is going to be offered by the state. And especially when you read the PPP manifesto, it still reads as something that might have been written back in the 70s when there was the whole socialism idea, the state handing out jobs, etc., etc. I think PMLN is the only manifesto which says something to the effect that what is good for economy is good for the country, and we're going to create jobs. PTI also suggests that we're going to create jobs. But it doesn't say that these are going to be jobs in the private sector. This is how private sector is going to expand, and consequently, as opposed to state enterprises or state actually offering more jobs, which is something that we've seen over the last 5 years during the PPP regime, at least. So role of the state versus economy is again something which doesn't come out very clearly, and the suggestion still seems to be that PMLN will still give out handouts, a subsidy in the form of handouts, the laptop schemes, the other schemes. PTI, tongue-in-cheek, it does talk about giving more autonomy to regulatory bodies and public sector enterprises, etc., but doesn't say how that it's actually going to be the individual and the private enterprise that will have to grow, and consequently the economy will do better and other things will happen. Just some basic points about that just stuck out. PMLN talks about terror, but not in an effective way. Talks about education, pretty much lays out everything that one can think of. Talks about national security management, but then again doesn't give a structure as to how will the civil-military imbalance or the basic tension between civil and military that's eaten up the country, how is that going to be addressed over a period of time? And that was the key problem with PMLN in '99, that kind of took over. So how is it that this time it's going to be different? Doesn't say much about that. Doesn't say anything about agriculture tax, and interestingly, it talks about raising tax to GDP from 9 to 15, doesn't mention agriculture tax. The other key thing, after the 18th Amendment, there's been devolution. And so it doesn't say what happened, why is it that PMLN has not done things that it promises in this manifesto that it will end up doing. When you read the PPP manifesto, it's just hard to believe because they've been around and nothing's happened. So it's this is just a promise document, and it's starting out with the thought that this is not hadith. You don't know what they're going to end up, and they do promise the moon if you look at it. But the sense of patronage as policy, that I think that's writ large over this manifesto. If you read through it, you still realize that this is a mindset where you're going to hand over, you're going to use state patronage to give people things, and that is governance as far as PPP is concerned. So it just seems completely outdated. PTI, again, one of the very striking thing, and I think that would just be a big disaster if it actually gets through, is one language education policy up till 8th grade. So here's an education policy, you've got to educate people, etc., etc., and then it says it will be mandatory Urdu as the medium of instruction up until 8th grade. And I think this is going to be a big problem. I, at least, was part of the Zia guinea pigs who went through the Malaysia and the Urdu mode for 2-3 years studying at St. Mary's, and I think that was a disaster. And so some of the policies in terms of management, so it seems like there are different people who've put together the PTI manifesto. There are people who've thought through the IT policy, who've thought through how the state enterprises are going to be made autonomous or functional or privatized. So some of the aspects of the policy are really good. Other aspects, such as education or the justice sector, it just seems there are other people within the PTI team doing it, and it doesn't make sense at all. So the whole thing doesn't read well together as a whole. I guess I've run out of my time, so I'll just stop there.
Okay, we will have time for round 2. There are 2 parties you didn't mention, JI and ANP. So, I mean, we just keep those things in mind, and once we're through, I'd like to remind the panelists, if you are doing a full comparison, do keep in mind that we do have ANP and Jamaat-e-Islami also. I focused on those that are running in Islamabad in particular, and MQM, when we designed this, they entered Islamabad last minute. So.
Great. Thank you. I'm sort of a last-minute entrant.
Yes.
So you're going to have to indulge me, because what I'm going to do is, in whatever time I have, is talk about these 5 parties to an extent, but also tell you about my own. Because, believe it or not, there are leftist parties still existing in Pakistan. You wouldn't know it because the media is keen to project a particular kind of election campaign and project certain kinds of images. So in some ways what I'm going to do is to suggest to you, give you a broad sense of my analysis of these manifestos by comparing them, as it were, to ours. And just FYI, we have 40 candidates running across the country, which means 40 in total, about 8 National Assembly seats and 32 Provincial Assembly seats. So, I agree broadly in many senses with what Babar has said. And it seems to me that comes down in some ways to the question of analysis, because I don't think it's possible to provide, as Babar said, solutions without identifying the problem. And the way that the problems have been identified is, I think, actually the crux of the matter. So as you would expect from sort of a rather orthodox leftist, I would have started off, and that's where we start off, by sort of identifying some established structures of power, whether they be class, whether they be, in Pakistan's case, I think in terms of how the state is structured and how power is distributed, whether it be ethnic or provincial, whichever word I prefer, ethnic, whether it has to do with various kinds of social structures, caste, gender. Not only is that sort of analysis conspicuous by its absence, it seems to me that there's a deliberate attempt to fudge it and to present things and present the problem and therefore the solution in rather flowery language, sort of development speak, without actually being quite clear about the model of development itself that perhaps has been adopted over the last 65 years and how these parties may be presenting an alternative. So what that means is that at the end of the day, there's these huge, big, massive, quite long documents with a lot of, which are in some ways exhaustive, but exhaustive in the sense that they are exhaustive rhetoric. And you have a host of different things, some of which Babar pointed to, in which figures have been thrown about, in which there's a purported commitment made to addressing anything from inadequate expenditures on health and education to addressing what is a very regressive taxation system, so on and so forth. But as I said, it seems to me that sort of there's an emphasis on addressing problems which are not accurately identified. So let me just give you some examples, which I think will help illustrate the point. At no point in any of these documents is there any meaningful analysis of the sort of long-term both continuities and change in property ownership, particularly land. Agricultural land, now increasingly urban real estate. And this is important because, especially if you look at the urban real estate question, it ties into many of the political conflicts that exist in this country, Karachi being case in point. But not just Karachi. I mean, if we're taking the example of Islamabad, I mean, Anjum Akil is famous or notorious, depending on which side of the fence you're on, because of his massive land grabs. And he's not the only one, mind you, who's involved in this. Like a large part of, a large segment of our major political entrepreneurs, and I use the word entrepreneurs very, decidedly, are involved in and tied, if not directly involved, tied into networks of, crudely land grabbers, but more generally, these huge, big, accumulation houses that rely both on urban real estate to make money and more generally on various kinds of speculative finance to make money. And it's just nowhere to be found, any kind of analysis of this sort, because it, as I said, underlies a lot of our major social conflicts. One thing that is terribly absent conspicuous by its absence is discussion of civil-military relations is there and thereabouts, a little bit here and there. But the military as a corporate entity, again, I think is a huge part of Pakistan's contemporary, if we're to separate the civil-military sort of political story from the fact that the military is now on record the country's biggest holder of land and biggest corporate conglomerate, I think is just deliberately obfuscating, both economic reality and political reality. And, you can tie that back into this question of land. I mean, most of our real estate scams are either directly patronized by the military institution or, if you want to take a lenient view, they've given their name to them. These are just anecdotes of what's missing. And I say that because we haven't missed it out. which is probably why we're not on TV 24/7. Then this question of the state, which, the one point that I want to pick up from what Babar said, I think this is very important. I mean, I don't see it just in the people's, I think it might be more obvious, in this whole question of the Bhutto cult and, we are we represent the wretched of the earth and we will give back to our, constituency. But it runs through and through, I think, all of these manifestos. The state has been reduced to a vast patronage machine. And whoever comes to power basically, uses that machine to reward its constituents in preparation for the next electoral contest. That happens at the local level in a city like Islamabad. It happens more generally. And constituents, as I said, can be very specific. In the case of, let's say, a party like the People's Party, the emphasis, in terms of at least what they say, is the constituency of the poor, the disenfranchised. Reading between the lines, they'll also say outside of Takht Lahore, right? That's sort of in between the lines in the People's Party. And then, so that takes me to the next point. Nowhere do I see any mention of the severe ethnic imbalance in the state and conflicts that derive from how the structure of power is conditioned by, which ethnic groups control disproportionate, or have disproportionate power. And again, I just don't think you can, how can we possibly understand, again, let's say Karachi, how can you possibly understand it without meaningful analysis of how that structure of power has evolved, how it's changed with, the MQM represented both continuity and change in this way. And then the last thing, because I see my chit coming, is I see actually it's there, but it seems to me in very sort of superficial manner. Is that one? Or? One. That's one, right? Is sort of how we fit into the international economic order. We are essentially a bankrupt country. Debt is a huge problem. We spend upwards of 40% of our budget every year just paying off interest. Nobody really has a plan for that except for waxing lyrical about how the incumbents are corrupt and we will come and wipe it out in, I don't know, 90 days or however many, 900 days, whatever the number is, it's ludicrous. Then, broader sort of policy content. On the left, I would have to tell you that I think that it's time. We don't have it here, unfortunately, because it's just our discourse is so woefully inadequate. But I mean, neoliberalism has proved a disaster the whole world over. And here we still have a vast majority of experts who are still saying this is the way to go. And our mainstream parties are just, either taking advantage of the fact that the intelligentsia is not taking up this growing global consensus about how financialization of the economy, going back to that original point about speculation being the mode of growth, whether real estate or the stock market, how, aside from wiping out, how the incorruptible patriotic parties who are going to come to power are going to wipe out the corrupt sort of incumbents. How are we going to address the fact that this, like I said, is an overburdened, basically colonial state, which is, as I said, thrives on distributing patronage and
Thank you, Asif.
So on.
Said, I was also surprised that we were supposed to focus only on the 5 parties which are contesting, the major parties contesting from Islamabad, because basically all the manifestos are talking about national issues. Nobody is really focusing on Islamabad in any case, and I don't know whether these candidates who are standing from have any sort of program or they even know what the issues are for Islamabad, urban or rural. But just very quickly going through the general concerns regarding the manifestos, I can't talk about the gender focus in great detail because gender cuts across everything and there isn't enough time for that. But basically I felt that there was an inadequate people's focus, whether it was on men, women, girls, boys, and many of the sectors. I'll come to that later. And women, girls, and other disaffected groups are often invisible due to inappropriate terminology. You know, it's basically employees, tillers, farmers, whatever, and you don't know who they are. A lot of promises are made, they're often vague, and even when they're there, they're based on absent, outdated, or incorrect data. You know, they're saying we are going to reduce maternal mortality by 60%. What is it now? Okay, so there's no age definition. When they're talking about youth, a lot of them do not talk about the, you know, what age are they talking about? They're going to, you know, they're improbable promises. 100% literacy. You know, what age group are they going to target and how are they going to achieve that? The PMLN is saying 80% enrollment in middle education at the middle level. Have we achieved anything at the primary level? So the targets are, you know, really off. And even when the promises are there and vague, they're generally silent on how to achieve them. Just giving you examples of vague statements, they feel that, you know, they pick up these statements and they feel that maybe they'll get votes because of that. Okay, technical financial support for effective participation in all spheres of life. I don't know what that means.
Which manifesto is that?
This is ANP, but it cuts across all of them. These sort of promises cut across all of them. Repealing discriminatory laws. They're not mentioned. The blasphemy law is not mentioned. The law of evidence is not mentioned. In a couple of cases, they mention progressive legislation, and basically it's against gender-based violence, like acid crimes and domestic violence and all, because they feel that's safe. But they feel that it wouldn't be safe to mention anything which is related to Islam. Now, somebody said that they haven't said what sort of state they want. The ANP is talking about a secular state, and it's coming across a little bit in PTI and PPP also. But the Jamaat Islami is saying very clearly that it wants the Medina model of the state. And one party which is the most retrogressive, I'm sorry to use that word, is the JUIF. And they have two versions of the manifesto. One is in Urdu, sorry to digress into a sixth manifesto, and they're very different. The English one is sketchy, and it's slightly more progressive than the Urdu one. In the Urdu one, I don't know how many people have read that. It's the same as they had it in 2008. It says that minority Christians cannot be cannot hold major offices. The president and the prime minister can only be adult males belonging to the majority Muslim sect, and they have a lot of other things like that. The Jamaat Islami is also saying that the education will be Islamized, the justice system will be Islamized. They're talking at length about Articles 62, 63, and several of those others. They're saying that jihad training will be given to every eligible male and female. I don't know how they're going to get the females out, because they can't come out for education. They're not going to give them any space for political participation except to vote. The Jamaat Islami is talking about that. The JUIF is not even talking about that. There are others who are making tall claims. ANP is saying 33% in political parties, in all boards, everything. Similarly, I think it's the PTI and PPP which are saying that they will be represented on all boards. I would like to know how many tickets they've given. They're, you know, minuscule, 2%, 1%, 3% most parties. And the sectors that they are focusing upon basically are education, health, social welfare, population welfare, and even in population welfare, they're focusing on female responsibilities. One feels that, you know, females are producing children on their own. The men have no responsibility at all, so there are very few, hardly any, who are talking about communication through the men or communication towards the men.
Which manifesto mentions population?
All of them mention population. All of them mention population, but basically it's through increased female literacy, providing services to females, providing more female staff. That's the way they go. And in the mainstream sectors, agriculture, livestock, poultry keeping, there's no recognition at all in most of them, in any of them, that women are agricultural workers also. They are the mainstay of livestock. They deal with poultry, those sort of things. Employment, industry, basically they're not touching these sectors at all. They're talking about labor rights, they're talking about ILO conventions and all, but there's nothing specific there. Environment. There's no focus on what the impact of the environment is on men or women or children or whatever, and how they can participate in environmental protection. Disaster mitigation, there's nothing. You feel that, and a lot of it is the trickle-down approach. A major example is the PMLN. They have better economic measures than most of the others, but basically there's no human touch there. And I just don't want to repeat what others have said, but I do agree that everything is vague. They're tall promises. And I did a gender review of the 2008 manifestos also. And I find that a lot of the things are the same. Things haven't changed. Some of the sentences, the statements are the same. They've just picked them up and updated them. Yes, they've cut and pasted and they've updated them. And also there's low differential focus on age groups and females of subgroups. Now it's a blanket thing, women, women, women. Females are of different age groups, men are of different age groups, and nobody really focuses on that. They have different needs, they have different potential, but it's just blanket. And when you're talking about minorities, there's hardly, I don't think there's anybody which specifically talks about women of minorities. When they're talking about laws of marriage, of Hindu marriage, nobody says that that women are going to be consulted. That when think tanks and boards are going to be constituted, that women are also going to be members of those boards. So I know there are much larger issues also, but if we are really looking at the gender issue and half of the population of the country, then we have to look at this. Because what really happens is, okay, I'll just finish. The manifestos are just general statements of intent. What is really important is what happens afterwards, how the action plans are developed. And the people who develop the manifestos do not develop the action plans. Everybody knows who develops those, and unless what they get from the manifestos, like education, health, whatever, if they are not very explicit on the rights and needs of women, other disaffected groups, those promises are never going to be fulfilled. Thanks.
Well, I'm not sure how seriously one should take these manifestos. That almost become a ritual just before the election. And most probably even the leaders of those political parties do not read the manifestos. It's full of bluster, promises, but unrealistic claims, but means nothing. And it is all over. I mean, I'm not saying it's in one party particularly, but if you go through the manifestos of different political parties, as Babar has earlier said, that most of the things read similar. There's hardly much of a difference, except for some of the emphasis. Largely, actually, what the whole fight is about, as Asim has said, actually, is to control the source of patronage. And that is the main purpose. And so rest of the things which has been the manifestos and other becomes completely irrelevant. There's huge disconnect between the manifestos which they present on every election time, but when it comes to the policy and the people who are ruling, they do not have any understanding of that. There's complete disconnect. Now let me come to some of the points. I think which shows how serious they are about. First, economy. If you see, actually, this is all hollow promises. Both the People's Party and the PMLN claim that they will raise the tax GDP ratio to 15%. People's Party says that it will do it by 2017, while PMLN said by 2018. But if you go through their manifesto, there is no way you can understand how almost 6% increase in the tax GDP ratio will happen. There's no step they have talked about. The only thing they have talked about by improving the taxation system. And there's no mention about agriculture tax, whether they are being taxed or about when they talk about uniform taxation system, there's no clarity about it. Again, actually, when the economy, people, obviously, PMLN's main stress, main emphasis is on the economy because they see as the pillar of their policy. There's talk about liberal economic policies, but again, actually, lots of the things they cannot achieve during this period, like creating 3 million jobs in 5 years' time. Can anybody actually even think about creating 3 million jobs within 4 or 5 years? The other actually target is about, and then it comes to the People's Party. That's much more hilarious actually. They have been in power for 5 years. And now they have given something which is really, it amazes me, whether the people who are preparing this document, have they read even some of the statistics and data which have been circulating around? I'll give you one example. Our prudent policies allowed us to turn a current account deficit of 14 billion US dollars in 2008 to a surplus of $62 billion in 2013. Do they realize what does it mean? We are still in current account deficit is still in the minus. In 2011, it was $4.5 billion deficit. And now actually there was a small surplus in 2012 because of the prices of the oil prices has come down internationally. But if they had actually $62 billion surplus, you know what would have happened to this country? And I think very few countries in the world have this kind of surplus. Well, actually, and I thought actually initially when I was reading this executive summary, I think there may be some misprint or something. Then I went to the document, and exactly the same thing was written. Again, actually, this full of lies. I will say actually I have to, because now they're saying that budgetary deficit has been brought down from 7.5% to 6.6%. Any person who has been following Pakistan's economy will see actually last session 2011, 2012, it was 8%. Or now it is expected to go up to 8.5% this year. So if you do not have a clear picture of economy, if you are actually all based on wrong facts, then what kind of manifesto will it be? Now coming to education, every political party I think promises to raise the education budget to 4.5%, which never happened. Even if half of that amount or half of this percentage was spent on the education, things would have been very, very different. And interestingly, both the political parties have been in power. And if you see, go through that, the spending on education is not even 2%. And in fact, actually, last year it has come down drastically because it is one sector wherever there need to be cut the expenses, they first actually target education. Punjab government is also saying, PMLN is also saying 4.5%. Now, after 18th Amendment, education has become a provincial subject. So it is not like up to the central government to do that. But when one can ask this question, how much money the Punjab government has been spending on education? They have opened Danish schools, 4 or 5, which actually takes away quite a lot of money, and the rest of the education sector is basically does not have enough money to run them. As far as the People's Party is concerned, the promise of 4.5% in education is according to People's Party's own act. There are 46,000 government schools in Sindh, and out of that, only 6,000 are functional. Only 6,000 are fully functional. Then around 15,000 others actually are semi-functional, and then others actually hardly exist on they only exist on paper. So when you have such kind of record, and then you actually claim, have this kind of lofty claims in your manifesto, is anybody going to believe that? Oh my God. The real issue is about terrorism. I will leave aside. One more actually, yes. PMLN claims that literacy rate will be raised to 100% by 2025. Can anybody believe that? And then the other is also PMLN. Pakistan will become will be among 10 biggest economy by I don't know exactly what term, but a country which is basically competing with the sub-Saharan state. That will be so. That's actually I just gave those examples like how seriously one should take those manifestos. Now coming to militancy, as we all agree that the biggest threat to Pakistan's national security and Pakistan itself and everything from economy to democracy all depend actually how we deal with the menace of terrorism. Now, how seriously they have taken, it's like almost a footnote, except for People's Party. People's Party has gone into detail of that. They have actually explained what really happened. But one wonders actually what has stopped them implementing most of the measures during their 5 years government. The worst was PTI, one line. And that's also part of the national security policy. PMLN beats everyone. It says that because of human rights violation during Musharraf government, some people tempted to take up the guns. So was it the human rights violation which forced them to kill 50,000 people? So that shows actually how serious they are about one of the major issues which is concerns Pakistan at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you. There are actually several issues which because I have read also the manifestos and I find it interesting. There's several questions that I don't necessarily agree with amongst the panels, but we will open up the questions with the audience because I think it's very important that your questions come first, and if we have time then I will, in my summation, raise a couple of issues.
My name is Arshad Saeed. I want to ask all the panelists actually, do you agree that the teams that write the manifestos have probably not even taken their leaders into confidence? You take, two of you mentioned the agriculture tax. In today's paper, 6 questions were asked of leaders from 5 political parties. And one question was, what is your stance on agriculture tax? PTI said we will tax. MQM said we will tax. Guess what the lady with the bag said? Hina Rabani Khar. That's a provincial subject. And surprisingly, what did Zahid Aziz say? He says no comment. No comment. The other thing which really concerns me is, this country is broke. They are talking about a pie in the sky. They'll provide this, they'll provide that. But nobody in the manifestos have said, why don't they reduce non-developmental expenditure? Has anybody said it? You've read the manifestos. If Ayub Khan could run East and West Pakistan with 10 ministers, did Shaukat Aziz have to have 84? And did the last government have to have 70? This question was asked, and guess what Hina Rabani Khar writes? While it's fashionable to talk about budget cuts, the expenditure of running government is a small fraction of the total pie.
Can we have a question to the panelists?
Do you agree that the leadership has no idea on what their teams have written?
Thank you. I'm Alia Bano from EU. And my question is very simple with the perspective of a voter. As we all know that all the political parties are not using their manifestos and ideologies to attract the voter. So then all these booklets and books, how much they value? Another quick question is that do they have, whoever would write these manifestos, do they have the participation of their office bearers from tehsil and district level political parties?
Already talked about, I think Zahid said it doesn't mean too much. It's just a statement of principle essentially. So it's not meant to have input from the C level, I think. I think it is the vision of the leadership. This is where we're going to take the country. And the disappointment that we're all sharing here is the disappointment that we don't believe that vision. We don't think it's a truthful vision. It doesn't address, it doesn't define problems properly, it doesn't address solutions properly. Ashid Saab, I think the PTI does say that it's going to bring down the number of ministries to 17 from whatever number. PMLN also tongue-in-cheek talks about using public property in a different way. PTI does the same thing. ANP is, I think, the only party that talks about rationalization of defense budget very clearly, and other than that, no other political party says that.
Yeah, actually, yes, I do think that their leadership knows exactly what they're doing. And they're quite happy to hand us this hogwash. And actually, I think that if you go all the way down to the tehsil or the district level, there may have been, if it was asked for, there may have been some meaningful input that had to do with real structural problems at that level. But I don't think one can overstate this issue that across the board, mainstream political parties basically are a microcosm of the state. So the state is this massive patronage machine, and mainstream parties and their cadre, even when they mobilize, that's what they do. Hum tuti lagwayenge, hum soling pakki karenge. That's how, at the lowest level, that's how votes are sought out. They're not sought out on the basis of कि हम मजमूई तौर पर इस ढांचे को बदलेंगे. It just doesn't happen.
I think you are talking about discussion on tehsil level. I don't think these manifestos were ever discussed in their Central Committee meeting, if they have. And so basically that's what I'm saying. I'm sure actually what happens, because I'm not saying out of my head, but they basically have few experts who sit and prepare these manifestos. If you ask if the senior leaders of the political party, they would not know what's written in these manifestos. So how are they going to implement on that? As far as the governance is concerned, you are right, actually there's lot of talk, like for example, as you said, non-development expenditure cutting. Everybody has said that. Every manifesto says that they will cut down the non-development expenditure. But how?
Yeah,
that's only one liner given there. And I think probably we have been hearing it for last 20 or 30 years. Every government, when they start, the first thing they will say they were going to cut non-development expenditure, but it always goes up.
Yes, I do agree that most manifestos do talk about cutting expenditure, austerity measures and all. I think PMLN is the only one where I did not find this, because Tahira and I are reviewing this and we did not find anything related to this. As far as the agriculture tax is concerned, several parties have mentioned it. And as far as the manifestos are concerned, most manifestos don't even mention who was part of the manifesto committee. It's only a couple of them which mention that. 3 years. And PMLF says that they have consulted civil society and women and peasants and God knows who else. I don't know how they consulted them, but that's what they say in their postscript. So basically manifestos, I'm sure that nobody really went down to the tehsil level, and most of them did not even bother to say who was part of the committee.
Sure, my name is Rashta Zahid. My question to anybody who would like to answer is that I'm confused and I'd like some advice, because I think as every citizen, my vote is in Karachi. I'm going to fly to Karachi to cast my vote in the election, because one always has this message that yes, you must vote, it's your responsibility, blah blah blah. But when you as citizens who should be looking at things in a very critical way, when you look at manifestos, you really don't want to vote for anybody, and then so you're in this sort of dilemma that should you vote or should you not vote? Is it good to vote or is it not good to vote? And who are you? So I'm Not sure if there's any advice on how does one deal with that.
I actually, when I read the manifestos, I was surprised. I was very pleasantly surprised. I had very low expectations of a number of issues. The absences, I think the panelists have very clearly mentioned. But the idea that many of the issues that do perturb us were put to pen to paper. And although the solutions were not clearly outlined, it is a statement of intent. But this was my knee-jerk reaction when I read 5, and not all of them impressed me, but some definitely did. And so actually my question to Babar is that if he has any knowledge on manifestos in the rest of the world, statement of intent, how much can we hold them in terms of accountability through the course of 5 years, if there is any precedent in other countries, in democracies or Western democracies or in parliamentary systems, if there's any insight into that. I mean, Asim can also contribute to that. But I actually was pleasantly surprised.
Thanks to all the panelists. It was, as expected, a very, very honest and frank analysis from all 4. My question is to Naheed Aziz, and it's a very specific question. What is your view of the Pakistan People's Party's verbose repetition of a very specific lie on every page, on every paragraph, in every chapter, by calling the Benazir Income Support Program a poverty reduction program, when we know that it is a corruption-riddled, gimmickry, charity handout, vote-gathering exercise. And we know this for a fact. And the chickens are coming home to roost now in this election. That is my question to Naheed Aziz. And my question, and my question to Babar is, what can we do to a party that has Inshallah, Naya Pakistan as its manifesto slogan, but promises us jirgas and panchayats as a judicial system? Thank you.
Exactly. My question is specific, direct to the professor, not so strong like that question. But is this your manifesto? Now, if we are talking about this education system, that Urdu in the PTI manifesto, they say that we focus on this grade 8. Many Pakistanis that I know cannot read your manifesto, Professor. They can't read Urdu. And another thing is, how many ladies are in your, you had said you have 40 candidates? How many candidates, ladies, do you have?
One.
My name is Mike Wooldridge. I missed the very beginning of your presentation, so forgive me if you covered this, but do any of the manifestos, as opposed to the campaign speeches, deal with the relationship between Pakistan and the United States, and in particular, the relationship with the United States in tackling extremism?
My name is Afan. My question is simple, that manifestos are promises which are something which we as people look up to and need to keep political parties accountable for, at least in theory. However, in practice, as per your analysis, we feel that even the manifestos themselves are flawed, and there's no way whatsoever to keep them accountable on later. So as a political system, and as much as it is ingrained in us over and over again that democracy is our best option, maybe an analysis from your end which sort of shed some light that is this the best system for us?
Balab te mora thaka thak. That would be my answer to you if it's possible. And if it's not, if obviously where there is no such candidate, you know, our party president, which has apparently become a great controversy now for some reason which I fail to understand, filed a petition in the Supreme Court asking, you know, this whole business of electoral reforms was actually a petition filed by Minto Sahab, in which he made a pitch that there should be an option, none of the above. And there's a reason for that. And it has directly to do with the fact that we ourselves are political contenders. We can't compete in the current electoral system. And as long as we can't, a none of the above vote in some ways tells us that people would have voted for another option, a real change option, if it was on the cards. That's not there now, but just so we know that that was part of the petition. I'm not entirely sure what you were referring to. If you suggest, no, the first question, I'll get to that. If you were suggesting that this should have been in English, then...
No, I'm not suggesting.
Okay.
I know that I know many very well educated Pakistanis that they cannot read Urdu.
Yeah, but they're the minority in that sense. Yeah, I mean, to the extent that if we took a sample of 200 million Pakistanis, there's probably many more who can read Urdu than English. And for the record, actually, when this was being talked about, the reason I was wincing at the fact that the PTI wants us all to, study in Urdu is not because it should be English, but because we should be allowed to be taught in our mother language. And this is a multilingual state. Okay, yeah, the multilingual state, that means at least through primary school, it should be, and the question about women, 2 and one had her papers rejected.
I think the objection to the none of the above was that it was being enforced, not it would change first past the post system, which is what the parliament has through law legislated, and the court was actually trying to interfere with concepts of political legitimacy, which is very well entrenched that it is first past the post. So if you change it to none of the above and then you go under 50% and then there's going to be a re-election, a second round, that would be changing the political system without people actually deciding it. 3 judges or 5 judges deciding. I think that was the problem with that option. In the present system, Rashta, I think not voting is voting for someone. I think that's the problem. That's the only argument that I have with myself, that you've got to get out there and vote for the least harmful option. Re-manifestos and accountability, Nino, there's no legal accountability. There cannot be.
And has never been in anywhere else.
There's never been anywhere else. There cannot be. But this is a political it's a marketing document. You don't get, what you voted for. And then there's the media, and it keeps flashing, okay, this is what people promised. I think it'd be interesting for the media to go back to 2008 and pick up some of the things and then say, this is what you promised, this is what you delivered, to kind of hold people accountable. PTI and the panchayat system, I think there is some genuine sense that our court system isn't delivering. So something has to change. One of the things that that people consider traditionally across the world is ADR, which is an alternative dispute resolution mechanism. And jirgas and panchayats can be ADRs depending on how you deal with them. Now the problem that you're identifying is coercive social traditions and how they get reflected in a jirga and panchayat system. So an ADR, whether it's Mushawarati Council or whether it's any of those other options, arbitration or mediation or any of those things, do function in informal environments, do function in other social, cultural environments. To say that they're never going to function in Pakistan, I think a lot of the people and a majority of this country will probably not agree with it. So there are certain biases, and we're sitting in a very liberal environment, and so we've got to, we also have to be aware of our own biases to some of the solutions that are being presented, just because we perceive them in a certain way. And so the perception of a jirga or a panchayat is selling away like a 3-year-old or marrying a 5-year-old. That's the only perception. So some of what PTI is talking about is giving institutional devolving authority. So if you read it all together, I'm not a big supporter of their justice sector reform because it's been done by Hamid Khan and Wajiuddin, who are like, you know, status quo powers. That's what's wrong with the justice system that needs to be fixed. But if you look at it, what they're saying is devolve power to village level, give the village these powers, and then create a justice system at the village level, so that a lot of things that then come to your regular court system and get stuck there for 15 years. Because every time something is stuck in a court system for 15 years, one of the parties is benefiting from it. So we'll have to find solutions to ensure that not so many, and it's expensive as well, for somebody sitting in Bahawalpur coming all the way to Lahore for a high court case, or in the Supreme Court coming from Balochistan, for example. It's denial of justice in various ways. So we'll have to be open-minded and find things that we can do within our own context and guard against some of the coercive social and cultural traditions, rather than just outrightly saying, oh, this is not going to be acceptable to us. I think we'll have to look at the subtext.
I'd like to answer Tahira, and also I want to come in on the Jirga issue. Tahira, you know, I've already told you that the PPP manifesto was so repetitive, I was tempted to throw it into the trash can. It was really tedious reading. Everything has been repeated, the BISP especially, if you want me to comment on that. I don't think it's a poverty alleviation program. It's basic, at best, a social security sort of thing, that you give a woman 1,000 rupees a month and, you know, she can have better food or more food for her children or whatever. So I agree with you on that. On the Jirga issue, when you said the majority of the people, I don't know if you included the women, because they're excluded, they are not allowed to come and speak in front of the Jirga. Yeah, minorities also, and also the low-income people, because of the power structures we have. There's the other side of the coin that you were also talking about. If our lower judiciary, our police, if they are reformed, because they're the most corrupt, the most exploitative systems that we have, and that is the reason, because they take money and, you know, they malign the women who come out. If that is improved, maybe we can have a better system at the local level. I do agree with you that sometimes it costs less and it's easier, it's more accessible to have jirgas and panchayats. But again, you can't have it across the board, and you can't say that it's the best system. It's the least evil, like you said, you know, you vote for the person who's going to create the least problem. One thing I forgot to say, and if I can say that now, many of the parties which have said that they're going to increase the budget for health and education for up to 5%, 6%, the JUIF says 15%, they mention the years. So, you know, by 2018, by 2020, by 2025, we don't know how the increase is going to be staggered over the years. There are no sequential priorities set for primary education. Everything is going to be together. And you're right, we cannot afford that.
Things I'll not repeat. A little bit on Punjab. I think probably there's a lot of confusion what Imran Khan is saying or what he really means. In fact, actually, Panchayat system is a not bad thing as basically the system is implemented in India, which means actually devolution of power to the lower level. So obviously, we'll have to go through that process. But what Imran Khan confuses it is basically a traditional jirga system, and that basically confuses the whole thing. Now on the foreign policy.
Yes, I want to remind you on the US.
That's what I say. Look, foreign policy again has been taken very lightly in the manifesto, and almost everyone have the similar language that we should have good relations with such a country, with the neighbors, on equal basis. But there is no special mention about United States as such. It's always like we will have a better relations with China, with the Muslim countries, with the neighbors, and United States, that kind of thing. But I think probably only PTI has actually mentioned indirectly that it will actually take off Pakistan from this American war on terror.
And also that they shoot down the drones.
No. That's basically not part of no, not in the manifesto. Yeah, but obviously that's the only mention about the United States, and I don't think that anybody has discussed in them at length.
Jamaat Islami does.
Jamaat Islami has a little bit, yes.
There's independent. The PPP says further strengthen and deepen relations with the US with emphasis on market access and enhanced trade opportunities.
That's what I'm saying, yeah. No, I'm saying actually the relationship on equal basis, they all have said that, but not like actually that any, like they will severe relations with the United States or whatever, actually. That's only...
PTI has specifically mentioned that its dependence on foreign aid, which would need multilaterals, bilaterals, and of course the largest contributor is the United States outside of the multilaterals. So again, indirectly, it has indicated that it will renegotiate that relationship. And in fact, it mentions very clearly that we will have very amiable and egalitarian relationships which are not tied with financial burdens, which automatically puts you in a position of weakness. So this was very clearly mentioned vis-a-vis relationships with all in PTI. Yes, in the manifesto.
Most of the people, when they talk about the youth, they forget one thing, that most of the guys who are in the age of 20 to 25, they were kids at the time when Benazir was there and Nawaz Sharif was there. So most of them do not know that almost all of the famous parties, they have been supporting dictators at some point of their life. But now they are standing up for democracy. So what a nation like this, when everyone has been supporting dictators at some point of time, a nation like this, what are we supposed to expect from these? That God forbid if again someone comes, a dictator, so maybe they will go again. Someone is going to support them, obviously.
Can I turn that question, because you are a member of the youth? What do you think? Would you support a dictator?
No.
Lokhezali, I'm a researcher at NAST. My question would be related to energy crisis. And which amongst you who would answer, I would ask who would be the best party to come up with the best solution for energy crisis? We are losing our economy. We're losing every industry going to Bangladesh, other countries. What are we going to do within the next 5 years if a good energy policy does not come in?
My name is Asma from NDU. I am a researcher there. Is there anything upon Balochistan issue, tackling Balochistan unrest? Is there anything in mention about Balochistan in manifestos? And my second question is about local government system. PTI has clearly mentioned in its manifesto that they will restore local government system within 90 days after coming into power. So,
as Mr. Babar said, that manifestos are the documents which are used to market themselves for the parties. So my question is that why parties did not give much concentration to manifestos? Why? What's the reason?
If you see actually last 5 years, all the provincial government had dissolved the local system government, and there had not been any elections. So they all have promised to restore local government system, but it's not very clear actually whether they will, how soon they will do it. Yes, PTI has promised to hold elections within 90 days, but I think probably it's not going to happen so soon, because 90 days is so little time to. But the other thing is that it's not up to the central government to decide. It's the provincial governments who will ultimately decide when to hold elections. And there was one more.
Anything for Zahid? Did we miss? Asif?
Yeah, you know, Balochistan, as I said, the whole question of the ethnic structures, how ethnicity structures power in this country is totally absent. You know, I found it, manifesto aside, I found it quite amusing that Imran Khan decided that we're going to end a military operation standing in Loralai, which, for those of you who know, is basically a Pashtun area. So, you know, I mean, it's one of those areas where people just don't want to step on GHQ toes, because you won't be elected. If you say something ludicrous like, this is not just one nation, there might be multiple nations in this state, and they should all be recognized, and they should all be, a genuinely federal system of government requires serious structural change. It includes the fact that our own security apparatus should stop kidnapping and mutilating Baloch youth. No way. No one's going to say that. Just because that's the end of their, they're no longer electable when you say stuff like that. The other question I wanted to ask is, should we expect any different from politicians or parties with histories of supporting dictatorship? Well, I mean, I do think it's important to distinguish a little bit between the parties. I don't think it would be fair to put them all in one sort of category. Some are decidedly more, have a more abhorrent record than others. But I think the question is, in fact, how, the whole, again, the bigger question. Unfortunately, regardless of whether some parties may have had a record of, having more consistent resistance to dictatorship, too many of our politicians jump ship. So the party might have a bit of a, better record, but half of the politicians who are currently in that party came from, some Noon, Meme, League, Kaf, whichever one you want to choose. And that is a reflection of, again, going back to that larger question. That's why these manifestos are somewhat meaningless, even if we can read positively into them. Because this is just for show. No one actually believes that this is why they're doing any of this. They're doing it because, if today they're in this party, tomorrow they'll be in another party. They want to get into a position of power so they can then, the 10 crores that they've spent getting elected, they can, earn 20. And, in the process, cater to some of their specific constituents, enough of them so that they'll get elected. And this also speaks, actually, by the way, to how cynical the voter also is. The voter in general, in our campaign, this is what we face as well. There's a sense that, look, okay, what you're saying, nobody else is saying. The way you're saying it, nobody else is saying. But, come on, that's not how it really works. And if we want to be honest with ourselves, and I'm saying this is what the voter is probably, we need to make sure that thana aur kacheri se hame tahaffuz mile. And you're just not capable of doing that because you're not the local badmash. I'm just calling a spade. And what I'm saying precisely is that unless you put your money where your mouth is, you can criticize them all you want, but we do go out there and participate in the democratic process. It's not good enough to sit on the outside and say, well, something should, the folks who support an army takeover or who look to chief justices for salvation are those who don't want to participate in the political process. We do, despite all of the constraints. And all I'm saying is that because the system is so entrenched, it's hard to compete. But we're still trying to compete, right? We're still trying to present an alternative mode of politics where it's not just about कि टूटी किसने लगवाई और सोलंग किसने पक्की की, where it's about something more than that. But the reality is that it's very entrenched, and because it's been now 30 or 40 years since ideas informed political engagements, you have to, like I said, identify the problem so as to be able to beat it.
Can I just a quick 2 questions? Anybody or everybody, why is it that we, over the years that we've ever had elections, that it always comes down to a pro-PPP and anti-PPP vote in Pakistan? That's the one question. And the second question that I have is that how do we counter this view that Pakistanis have developed of quick fixes? I find one of the reasons that democracy doesn't go down well with us is that we're a quick fix mentality and nation. We want the Messiah to come and just clean it all up. Whereas, as Asim says, these are heavily entrenched systems that are going to take kind of a lot of combating and, a lot of overcoming. So when are we going to get a politician, or how do we get to getting a politician who talks about that, who talks about patience with the democratic process?
I think the dictator point, two things. One, I think sometimes people change. They learn from experiences. And I think in a country where everyone's soiled, you've got to make those distinctions within the gray. There isn't that black and white. So Nawaz Sharif in 1993 or 97 is different from the Nawaz Sharif post 99, because we're all products of our experiences. And I think one thing that PMLN top leadership did learn was not to sleep with the army again. And I think we've seen that over the last 5 years. So, same thing with the judges. They did, we have this conversation all the time. Oh, back in 2000 you did this, and 2007 was different. Nothing had changed between 2000 and 2007 except public opinion. And public opinion wasn't willing to accept another set of judges endorsing the second coup of the same general. And so if now, today, democracy is fickle, in a sense that there's a real possibility that there might be a 70-70-70 divide, or something of the sort, which would mean that there might not be, we might not even get a coalition government. If PMLN cannot work with PPP and PMLN cannot work with PTI, and that's the kind of divide we end up in, we're not going to have a coalition either. And that's going to really expose the strain, because democracy isn't well entrenched so far, and so the military will come into play, and then we'll again, then it'll be very interesting to see if there is a solution which isn't going back to re-election, and I don't see that happening in a country like ours, especially when our reserves are at such a critical level that we won't have the time to hold another election before we can find a solution for our financial problem. So it's going to be very interesting to see that if there is a technocratic extra constitutional solution, how many people are going to say, okay, no dictatorship again. And it'll be interesting to see how many judges say we're not going to swear oath to a PCO, despite all the rhetoric that's coming out of courts. So let's just hope that patience doesn't run out when it comes to dictators. And with Musharraf's returning and the way the military has behaved, it's very, very obvious that the arrogance and the sense of entitlement and ownership of the narrative hasn't gone away. It's still very much there, and it's alive. And they feel very upset that an army chief is being treated like a criminal. So that's just the one thing. I think somebody talked about marketing. Why wasn't enough attention paid to manifestos? I don't think attention wasn't paid to the manifestos. I think we've just lost our ability to speak candidly. Now, some of these issues are very difficult policy issues. So if you say this is our war and we're going to fight the Taliban, there are a lot of people who oppose that viewpoint. And so you don't want to say that out loud. If you say, Taliban are our citizens and our brothers and we should talk to them, then you're going to lose the vote of a lot of people who would say, who killed the 50,000 people, who killed the soldiers, etc., etc. These are divisive issues, and the society is divided. So what's the solution? Somebody either comes out with a lot of candor and conviction and says, this is the problem, this is the solution, and then convinces people. Or we have the opposite, which we have in our political class, which is projecting what people wish to hear and then saying that, which isn't true leadership. But unfortunately, that's what we're being served, even by the PTI that ends up making that claim that, the leaders don't tell you what the problem is and we're going to speak the truth. They also end up, Imran Khan ends up saying the same hypocritical things, doesn't speak against the army, doesn't do other unpopular things which could jeopardize him coming into power. And the difference really between him and others is that the others have been in power and they understand those compulsions of power. And here is somebody from the outside, and your hope is that once he comes to power, he's not going to be as compromised. And yet, in coming to power, he seems very compromised, not to kind of tip on toes where he can get it in trouble. So I think as a society, and the only reform could probably come from the society where we expect different things. We expect more from the leaders, as opposed to saying, oh, the leaders are flawed, but we're flawed in fundamental ways as well. Because we're very used to that system of patronage, and we're happy so far as, you know, we're on the right side of the establishment. The last point about energy. I found PTI's and PMLN's policies more detailed. They talked about the cost of providing energy. They talked about the fuel mix. They talked about hydropower and rationalizing all of this, but I'm no expert. The others were just paying lip service. But those two I thought had more developed ideas.
Just a quick response on the manifesto issue. Apart from the fact that a lot of them don't really have any intentions of following up on the promises, because there are other factors also. You mentioned about them not coming into an absolute majority, not forming a coalition, because if you are not in an absolute majority, you cannot impose whatever you promised. You cannot fulfill the promises, especially if your plans are not based on the resources you have. You know, they don't match. The other thing is the political expediency, which you also referred to, and because a lot of them are into opposition for the sake of opposition, because in the last tenure also, you have it in your own manifesto. If a party you don't like brings a bill into parliament, you just oppose it for the sake of opposition and it falls through. And then now there is the devolution issue, and like I think Zahid and somebody else also mentioned, they haven't really taken that into consideration. You know, what can they do and what they can't do, because they haven't really devolved the power properly. They haven't thought it out properly. The institutions are not there. But again, the law is there. So they cannot do something which actually the provinces should do. There are so many provincial subjects. Can they do anything on education, on health, whatever, unless the provinces agree? And it is there in some of the manifestos. Like the ANP states up front that it will work with the other parties to develop that, a consensus. Some of the other parties are also saying in bits and pieces that they will try to build a consensus on so-and-so issue. It's a way of copping out also, but it is also a recognition that they can't go it alone.
Energy. They all have discussed energy problem, and I think in detail, particularly PTI and the PMLN. But the major issue is still missing. All those political parties have taken the energy problem as generation problem, which is not correct. The real issue is the basic mismanagement, the corruption. I was talking to some people like who know they are actually part of this policy making. 300 billion rupees are lost. And nobody has spoken about that.
That's not true.
No, I'm talking about the people who had been working in that sector.
No, PTI and PMLN to some extent does mention
no, they have not
mismanagement
no. What happened, I've read both the manifesto. They have actually in detail the problem is, and then they have not mentioned about this factor. The main emphasis is on generation, like whether the particular PMLN, they just spoke about it. Now, this divide, traditional divide you are talking about, PPP and anti-People's Party, it doesn't exist anymore. It was a matter of in the 70s and to some extent in 1990s, but I don't think, particularly in this election, this divide has gone. In fact, People's Party is lagging behind, and the major fight in Punjab particularly is taking place between the PTI and the PMLN. In fact, actually, this divide was much sharper in Punjab than anywhere else. So that is completely gone. The two political parties which are competing each other are not the PMLN and the People's Party. It is PTI and the PMLN. So,
to sum up, I don't like to leave a vibrant and a broad spectrum of conversation and discussion in a unoptimistic tone, if that word exists. But manifestos, I think, are important. In a society in which we strive towards a democratic dispensation to be taken seriously between the state and its citizens, and then in the Committee of Nations, what we write and what we commit to should be considered important. From the panelists, it's very clear from various perspectives, both ideological and from an ideological point of view and from a gender point of view, we are not taking what our political class is saying to us seriously. We don't seem to trust them. There's a track record, it seems, with this distrust. We hope that as democracy strengthens and takes root in this country, we will begin to put that trust in those who we empower through our vote. So let's take these manifestos and in the upcoming 5 years, actually take them to task and make them accountable on what they have actually said. Whatever framework that they have chosen without outlining the exact solutions, but we can assume what are the intentions that these political parties are trying to communicate with us. And that, unfortunately or fortunately, is on us. We usually put this burden on those who are elected and unelected. But since these manifestos and these messaging technically is communicating to us, there is a role for us to play in terms of making them accountable. So with that, thank you very much and hope to see you on Wednesday, where we will be discussing the economic lens, and energy will be given as a specific case study vis-a-vis the 5 manifestos. Thank you very much.